Religion's played a large role in science fiction. There have been entire pantheons created throughout science fiction.
I think the Bible was alluded to in all sorts of fiction, but I think you're right. I mean, especially if you think about the road. There's so many biblical allusions, even the names. The one name there's only one character with a name in that book, and it's a biblical allusion.
Religion, in a way, represents morality, and if there's a degree of magic and science fiction and fantasy, all involved in religion. And I think part of it is, what do you believe?
Religion, I think, can achieve several purposes or goals. It can explain where, in our case, where humankind comes from, or in a science fiction where an alien race comes from. In other words, what's a species' origin? Where they originate from? It can answer a question about what their purpose is. It can guide them in terms of their morals and in terms of their ethics. What that species or that race or that people define as good or bad or right or wrong. It provides that compass for those types of decisions. And I think lastly, religion can answer that or provide an answer for that question about what happens after the corporal body ceases to be. Once the body dies, is there something else that makes us human, or that makes an alien race that alien race? And if there is, we tend to call it a soul. Where does it go? So I think religion provides that fertile ground in science fiction to explore all three of those questions: where we come from, what our purpose is, and what happens to us after we die.
It's a canonical work that I think that a lot of people will recognize those allusions and get a deeper meaning from them. It's the same reason that any author uses an allusion. And I think with science fiction that maybe they're trying to connect with the beliefs that we have in the real world, connect the science fiction to it, so maybe we believe them more.
50 years ago, it was more common to have some sort of religious background amongst members of society as opposed to not. That was the exception, not the rule. And very few people admitted to being agnostic, atheist, or even a lot of times Islamic or some other extreme religion. We relate to it because 90% of the time, and I'm
scientifically, it might be tough to explain the flood and the ark. But for me, A, I believe it, and B, I don't care how feasible or unfeasible it is. I mean, it's, to me, I
think if you're a believer in the Bible and the stories of the Bible, that it impacts you because it, you just have a connection, to that character at that moment. You can identify with that character. And if you're not a believer, you still connect to those ideas, the ideas that are in the Bible, even if you don't, totally believe in them. So I think either way, it creates a connection between the audience and the character.
It's been there for thousands of years, and the same way with a lot of the religious stories and concepts and so forth. And again, I think that they can be hooked into science fiction and extrapolated and, I don't want to say revised, but the concepts can be used in the science fiction format, and they lend themselves to it very, very well.
Okay. A lot of times what you see are in science fiction, it's so scientifically based that the characters themselves are dealing more from a scientific origin of humanity, evolution. It's a rarity to see religion brought into it, and sometimes when you see it, it's often classified as something controlling, a limiting factor, and we don't believe in that. But when you find that person of faith in a science fiction medium, it's a rarity. But at the same time, those people who have a religious belief, a faith, they want to relate to that character because that character is showing part of themselves. We try to relate ourselves to any character that we can see ourselves in. And watching a movie, you get that willing suspension of disbelief. You want to believe for the fun of the movie and the sake of the movie that this could actually happen. So you suspend your disbelief. That can't happen because of fill in the blank. And you're trying to relate to the characters in the movie to make it more thrilling, more interesting, more fun to watch. And you see that religious character and you say, hey, that's me.
The 60s were an interesting time for sci-fi. The already firmly established genre began to explore new, stranger, more baroque concepts and methods to get a message across. A Canticle for Leibowitz is no exception.
Canticle for Leibowitz is a classic examination of a post-apocalypse, and we're talking hundreds of years after the apocalypse. There's been a nuclear war. The new Catholic Church runs everything. All idea of thought, all idea of education is done by a very few monks in a very few abbeys.
Conflagration happened, pretty much destroyed all technology and pretty much everything, and it created new mutant species, but yet there were humans that survived, and once they got together, they would either create societies or they would create, within the societies they would have religions, but then the religions themselves sometimes became their own societies. And so then there was kind of the interactions between the different societies that was going on. And in that, from the blueprints that they found when they finally found the bomb shelter, they were able to reconstruct some technological things that were prevalent in the 20th century. And they just kind of started over from the ground up. So they based this whole religion on basically this guy's grocery list and some things that he was doing. So it's just an interesting take on how future societies would look at something that they found in the past and what they would make of it and how much they would make of it. So.
And the idea was that science caused all these problems. Technology caused the problems.
Also in the Leibowitz story, you had this old Jewish traveler who considered himself to be a tent maker, who pretty much was always around wherever things were happening. So whether or not he was actually Leibowitz was never really truly brought out, but I kind of get the feeling that he was Leibowitz. But the thing is, he had lived hundreds, if not by the end of it, thousands of years. He had a never-ending lifespan. He was just around for the duration. But he was always kind of there to see what was going on in the religion that was sprouted from his leavings from the 20th century.
Fear and ignorance always lead to destruction. That it's almost like we're genetically encoded to learn more, to be curious, and to keep going forward. That no matter how stringent the rules, we will try to move forward. Each one of the Canticle stories goes a little bit further in technology. There's a transition to limelight, and from limelight to electric light. There's transitions from horses to internal combustion engines, from ground vehicles to air vehicles. And there's always a bit of the establishment trying to fight the change that comes with advancing knowledge and advancing technology. And there's also always the warning that if we don't understand our past, There's an old saying, he who doesn't remember history is doomed to repeat it. The Canticle series ends with another nuclear war and the destruction of civilization again because nobody remembered the past.